This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 68 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by Ian Eagle, the NFL on CBS, NBA on TNT, the voice of the Final Four, the Brooklyn Nets, Thursday Night Football on Westwood One Radio, but much more importantly, the recipient of the 2023 Awfulie for Best Play-by-Play Announcer.
Yes.
Ian, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. And if you'd like to make your case for why you should win the 2024 award, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Brandon, I want to first thank my second grade teacher, Mrs. Shastri. Without her, I don't think it happens for me in 2023. So what happens in 2024, I don't know. I don't want to come in here with an agenda, but would love to go back to back.
So yeah, when you're out in public, do more people recognize you for your Awfulie award or being the first NFL announcer to make a Taylor Swift reference?
Yeah, no, when I'm out in public, I get recognized for being Daniel Snyder. That's the challenge, really, more than anything else. That actually happened at a Washington game many years ago, where our broadcast booth was situated. It was right next to the owner's booth. And there were fans. It was not going well for Washington. Yeah. There were fans directly below us that started pointing at me in particular. And I'm going to clean it up, but they're yelling, "Hey, screw you, Snyder!" And I made eye contact with them, which is not something that you normally do. And I was like, "No." And I pointed to my CBS insignia, the jacket. I'm like, "No." And then I kind of leaned over and pointed towards
redirecting them. Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel Snyder was sitting next to Sam Donaldson, the former ABC newsman. And then they looked at me, they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Screw you, Snyder." So eventually he got it, but I got it first.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he got that an awful lot there in Washington.
Yeah.
The blank space call. I'm curious if that was prepared.
Prepared? No, not, man, I got to get this in. I got to figure out a way. I obviously knew that relationship started to go public. There were rumors that week about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. So I did have in the back of my mind, if he does something extraordinary or scores a touchdown, maybe there's an opening. But no, did not have it prepared. Like, this is the way it's going to go down. And that's what ends up happening a lot on play-by-play. You have best laid plans of things that you think might fit or might work. And then if the moment never comes, at least I've learned through the years, don't force it. But if there's something that naturally feels like it might actually hit and connect with the audience, then I have learned how to trust my instincts and let it rip. That was one of those. I certainly did not think it was going to get that level of attention.
Yeah.
And my phone started buzzing like no one's business after the call. And I'm looking down and I realize, oh, okay, people seem to get the reference. And then we got to the airport and we're waiting for our flight, and our crew, for the most part, a bunch of us were flying on the same flight. And someone from the crew leaned over and was like, "Ian, you're on TMZ." And did I do something over the weekend? That was there some issue that I didn't know about that now is coming back to haunt me on the streets of Jacksonville? No, it was a call. And maybe the funniest part of it all, I still have it saved in my phone. There was a picture of Travis Kelce, a picture of Taylor Swift, and then my face in between them. And I just thought, okay, this might be nirvana. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get above this at any point in pop culture.
So is it something though that, like, during the week of preparation that just kind of pops into your head as maybe this is something that could get used during the game?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it was starting to take hold within the NFL world and certainly within pop culture. But it's know your audience and recognize that this might go over some people's heads. The way that I thought it came out, even if you didn't know that Blank Space was a Taylor Swift song, you'd say, "Oh, okay, that worked for the touchdown
Right,
call."
right. Yeah.
So it worked in duality in some way. I don't like to overanalyze these things
Yeah.
because that doesn't work either. You really do have to do it from a real honest place. And if you're banking on things taking off and that's not a good plan.
Yeah. Do you think making that Taylor Swift reference put pressure on other NFL announcers to make their own references?
Yes, a lot. That was the intended goal. I wanted everybody that does NFL games to now feel that level of stress. No, I think if anything, it may have taken the onus off it a little bit, because once that was thrown out there, maybe you don't go back to the well. You find a different way to work it in. I think with at least the way that I try to view these games, if there is an opening for levity, as long as you're not forcing it in, as long as you're not doing open mic night at the Chuckle Hut, if you're recognizing that maybe something works organically and it does hit you in the moment that, hey, this actually is funny or potentially clever, then trust yourself and do it. If you're trying to work in 7 lines that you wrote down on a piece of paper for the week, it's probably not going to work out.
Sure. What did you think of the Taylor Swift effect, particularly last season when it was new and the
Yeah.
world and NFL fans had to adjust to seeing Taylor Swift for, I don't know, maybe a total of 30 seconds during a 3-hour broadcast?
Well, there was this culmination at the Super Bowl. I did the NFL World Feed with Charles Davis, my Sunday partner on CBS. So we had worked a secondary studio hosting for CBS. And as we wrapped up, there was someone assigned by the NFL to get us from that location to our booth in Las Vegas. So they take us through the catacombs of the stadium. It was a very roundabout way to go because a lot of those areas had been cut off. And eventually we get into an elevator bank that is for media and media only. And we're waiting and the line is building. We're probably about 14 people deep now, and we're getting close to kick. And there's a pause. And now a security guard comes in and says, "Folks, we're going to need you to stay in your places. We have an emergency." And everyone's like looking at one another. What is happening right now? So normally, what would the perception be? That if there's an emergency, someone would come out of the elevator, the doors would open, we're on the ground floor, and they would wheel them to whatever help that they're looking for. No, it's not what happened. It's someone in a wheelchair that they open the door to this little vestibule, and it's a woman, and it's a blonde woman with a blanket over her head. And they wheel her past us, like 4 people, and put her onto the elevator. And the elevator doors close. And Charles was next to me, and there's dead silence in this area. And finally, after about 10 seconds, I just said out loud, I said, "Was that Taylor Swift?" And everyone goes, "Holy shit. Was it?" And I still to this day don't know if it was. But that to me typified what the experience was like for basically an entire season. Of everybody in the NFL was on high alert all the time that she might be at a game, her presence,
Yeah.
how does it change? How does it change your approach from a TV point of view? Are you showing her? How many times are you showing her? So it's definitely something I had never witnessed or experienced doing the NFL on TV since 1998. We've had celebrities at games, but we've never had celebrities that we've gone back to 4, 5, 6 times to get their reaction in real time. So
Yeah.
very unique.
Yeah, I very much want to know if that was Taylor Swift, just for the sole
sure.
purpose. Like I'd love to hear Chris Russo's reaction to finding out that Taylor Swift was being wheeled through the
Hey,
tunnel with a blanket over her head.
You cannot close down the elevator banks on Super Bowl Sunday for Taylor Swift. Can't happen.
Last week you had the Jets Broncos.
Yep.
Actually, the week before you also had Jets Patriots for Thursday Night Football. So
Yep.
back-to-back weeks with the Jets. Do you get to meet with Aaron Rodgers during your production meetings for those games?
TV, yes. Radio, no. TV, yeah, we did probably about 20 minutes with Rodgers on Friday at the Jets facility. We had them week 1 at was that week 1 or week 2? Week 2 at Tennessee. And on the road, you get a little less time. It was probably more like 12 minutes, but substantial. He's excellent in the meetings. He's a deep thinker. He is exceptionally smart. His football IQ is through the roof. He's interesting. And you look at your yellow pad afterwards and you say, whoa, I've got 8 or 9 things from Aaron Rodgers. The way the game was set up with the elements, a lot of what was discussed ends up going by the wayside in terms of offensive game plan or approach because they couldn't do anything. It was really interesting doing all these games for all these years. I've been in bad weather situations before. I don't know why this one seemed to have felt worse. Maybe because it came out of nowhere. Nobody expected it to be that dreary. And the rain, while it wasn't torrential, it was steady and it was just ugly. The whole day in the New York, New Jersey area turned out to be ugly. So offense in the first half, both sides could do very little. And then there was a small window in the second half where it did open up a little bit for them. But for the most part, the score was a clear indication of what kind of game it was.
What is the conversation like with Aaron behind closed doors? Is he mostly just talking about the game, or do you get? I mean, obviously the interviews that are for public consumption go off the rails sometimes. Does he like to talk about things other than football in those meetings?
No, not really. It's based on your questions as well. We know we have a finite amount of time. Our goal in those sessions is to get information that will help us cover the game better, help us tell the story better, help us understand what the thought process is for him, for the team. So, yeah, are there some laughs? Are there some light moments? Yes, he's got a really good sense of humor, actually, and enjoys sarcasm and enjoys flexing his memory when things are jarred about previous experiences, previous situations. Any production meeting I've had with him through the years, going back to the Packers and now with the Jets, has been a positive experience. By his own admission, he is mellower now than he was. And that's based on him literally saying to us on Friday that he's done a lot of work on himself.
Yeah.
That his patience level was very low back in the day. And now he's gotten to a place where he does have a bit more understanding for others, but it doesn't mean that his standard isn't high. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't expect the same from his teammates. Strangely enough, I think it played out that way against Denver in that they were not on the same page in the fourth quarter. And he did not have the connection that he normally has with his skilled position players to get some things done when they needed it. And it's been a legitimate topic this week leading into the Minnesota game at London as to whether or not they have to start making adjustments based on how he views things pre-snap and whether or not his teammates can follow along with him and have an idea of what he is turning the play into based on what he sees. So interesting evolution. that was a very tough pill to swallow for the Jets. A game, obviously, you kick a 50-yard field goal, you win it potentially, and maybe the sky isn't falling quite at the level that it is right now in the New York area, but there would still be a bunch of question marks about what direction they're going in.
Yeah. Have you noticed a change in those production meetings with Rodgers over the years? Is he more open, or like he said, he's more mellow? He, by his own admission, do you notice that change over the years?
Yeah, I didn't get him a lot in Green Bay, just based on, at the time, NFC, CBS. Maybe I had him 2 or 3 times during his days with the Packers. So if you ask me the same question about Tom Brady, if you ask me the same question about Peyton Manning, about AFC specific quarterbacks that I ended up doing 20, 25, 30 games, probably more if I really started to count it up for Brady and for Manning, I could give you a more educated answer. My dealings with him previously had been good.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was coming from a negative place and wow, what a metamorphosis. Now, oftentimes that's based on circumstance. Is it coming off a win? Are they feeling good about themselves that week? Are they happy to see you? It could be based on your partner. I was with Dan Fouts a couple of times with Rodgers. That's an all-time great quarterback. So there's a respect level there going into the meeting where Rodgers knows that they're going to speak the same language to some degree. And the other part is often perception. You know, I have found with this setup, it's not always the player that has a perception of you, but it could be their spouse. It could be their parents. It could be a cousin. It could be a best friend telling them, oh, this crew, they rip you. And now you're on the receiving end of some possible derision that you're not even sure where it came from. So it's an interesting dynamic. And I've seen it play out now over a long time. For the most part, I feel like your work speaks for itself. And, you know, the hope is that if someone does have an issue with you, that they are adult enough to bring it up and you could talk it through.
And have they? Have you had anybody confront you like in that
I've
setting?
had a few through the years. I don't want to point anyone out. It's not fair to them. They can't defend themselves here. And a bunch of players that have retired that either weren't happy with what they perceived to be negative coverage or a specific line or word used. And I get it. You know, oftentimes players don't watch the TV broadcast.
Right.
Coaches may not watch the TV broadcast. So they're getting it. It's like a game of telephone. They're getting it secondhand, third hand, or they're seeing it on social media. They're taking that as gospel. It's part of the deal, and you have to navigate those waters. I certainly don't ever make it personal on the air. I made a pact with myself very early on doing this job. Whatever you say, you better be comfortable with someone coming up to you and asking you, why did you say that? On NBA fronts, on the local front with the Nets years ago, a head coach had an issue with something that he thought I said. And I said, Coach, I have no problem sitting down and watching the tape with you, and you can point out to me what you had an issue with. And his reaction was, and walked away. I later found out that what he had an issue with what I said, his son was watching the game at a sports bar on the West Coast and later realized it wasn't our feed. It was the other team's feed. So there was all this drama for a day and it wasn't our broadcast, and it came from his son who had been watching it in a crowded sports bar. So those are the circumstances that you're often dealing with.
Sure. How valuable are those production meetings for an announcer before a broadcast?
I think on the TV side, they're incredibly valuable because basically you're parachuting in. And while it's your job to know as much as possible about the two teams that you're covering, you're basically going through the stories written that week, whatever material that you have compiled over the months leading up to the game. But the only way you can get some real answers is by talking to the head coach and talking to the quarterback and talking to a star offensive player and defensive player. And that's where you can get some notes beyond the obvious. And you're serving many masters in these broadcasts. On a national level, you're doing the game for a national audience that may have no rooting interest for the two teams involved. On a local level, you're doing the game for each team's specific fan base. And then, as we've learned, Brandon, through the years, you're doing the game for people that might have a little something extra on the game, whether it be gambling or whether it be fantasy football. So think about the variety of people that are watching your game and those that are just tuning in for a minute or 2 minutes, or they're going multi-screen and they're toggling back and forth between audio of one game and audio of another game. So that's, to me, the constant reminder of try to have an understanding of your audience, try to have an understanding of being balanced in your coverage for both teams. You meet with both teams, you prepare for both teams. Obviously, the game will dictate where you go in certain ways, but I have some kind of internal scale that is always working during the game of, hey, are we doing enough for this team, for this player, for that team or that player? And your goal by the end of the game is to hopefully have it somewhere 50-50. Now you get a 35-3 final, and the scale is going to be leaning towards one side, and you have to recognize that. But it's still your job to go in there with the idea that you're trying to tell all the stories, not just one side of the story.
The NFL obviously made it known that Tom Brady is not able to take part in those production meetings this year because of the pending ownership deal with the Raiders. Is that restriction then making his job harder in your mind, especially as a first-year analyst?
I don't think it's making it harder for him because his insight level is very high. I could guarantee you that his staff that he works with throughout the week, research team, broadcast associates or associate producers, whatever you want to call them, graphics people, are keeping him in the loop throughout the week. And then his actual team on Fox with Richie Zions and Rich Russo and Kevin and the rest of the crew, Aaron and Tom, they're keeping him honest. Whatever they're getting out of that meeting, they're sharing with him. So I don't think he's in the dark. Is he missing out a little bit on the one-on-one connections that you can gain some additional insight from? Yes, maybe. But you know what's interesting? I actually think, and this is hard to imagine, I actually think the players and the coaches are missing out because they would be curious to talk to Tom Brady and to pick his brain. And they're missing out on that interaction in person or on Zoom. And look, Tom can pick up the phone and talk to anybody at any time. If he needs information, he's going to get it.
Yeah.
I do think they're missing out on some of that. That's part of what those meetings serve, in my mind, building rapport. And maybe, again, I don't know the inner workings of their group. The hope is that they're having a dinner the night before, there's bonding, so they're still having that time together. A lot of the time you spend with your crew is going to and from the facility to meet with the team and then to and from the hotel for the road team. That part, I feel like, is a large part of building chemistry. And I'm sure they're figuring out a way to do it in other areas. And that's really the ultimate goal. Every crew's got to figure out what works out best for them. There's no doubt in my mind that they have sorted through that and they've come up with a really good plan.
Are you able to work with a first-time analyst and know pretty early on whether this person has the ability to be good, or is that something that takes time?
No, I normally know pretty quickly. And I've worked with a lot of different people and different experience levels. A lot of it is based on rapport. So just how you interact with one another in general when the headsets are not on,
Yeah.
and then how that translates on the air. And then if the red light goes on, so to speak, meaning that you're on the air, does that person change, or are they the same person that you've been dealing with off the air? If we're talking football, basketball, whatever it might be, 5 minutes before air, and they're making excellent points, it shouldn't then change when they tell us, hey, 3, 2, 1, go. It should be a carryover. So that's been my approach to this, is find some commonality with whoever it is you're working with. And then obviously, if they're new to the business, you want to help teach them what this is all about. But I haven't found in my experience that giving a partner a 10-point list of what they need to work on is the proper way to do this. I think you figure it out as you go. There is trial and error. And more than anything else, for me, it's trying to put them into a comfortable position so that they can do their best work. And the hope is that the trust develops, not just between us, but between the whole crew. And I've certainly been in situations where I've worked with someone that is new to the business that I had a pretty clear idea that they would be really good at this early, because of the natural ability that they exhibited.
Who's an example of that?
Stan Van Gundy would be an example. Had basically very little game experience, and we ended up doing a season together before he went back to coaching in New Orleans. And I just found him to be a basketball genius. He sees the game in a certain way, and it was just a matter of translating it on television and making it digestible for the viewer. He's a savant. So seeing his notes prior to a game, seeing the amount of work that he put into it, seeing the angles that he already saw, then it was just slow pitch softball to me, setting him up, putting him in proper position. And then what I found with Stan was light moments, that he does like to laugh. He is sarcastic. He is sardonic. And this was a way to maybe combine both the basketball side and the personality side. So I felt the first game we did together, I thought this guy has a lot of ability and could be really good at this.
Is it difficult to work with so many different analysts and personalities? Like you have different analysts that you're working with on Thursday Night Football. You obviously Charles Davis on Sunday, and then TNT, yes, college basketball. Does that make it harder to find chemistry? And like, do you tailor your broadcast? Does it change based on the analyst you're working with?
It does change. I think it's incumbent on the play-by-play announcer to be malleable and recognize that you can't just do the same old thing and ask the person next to you to adjust to you. I think it is very much on you to figure out the best way to approach a broadcast with the partner that you're working with. And it's not even something that I'm verbally talking about with them ahead of time. It's really just putting them in a place of ease. And I find that often analysts do their best work when they don't feel the stress of, well, how's this going to work? When am I going to know when to talk? And do you give me a hand sign? I don't go through that with them. I really do think it's more of the natural side of it. We're having a conversation, and good conversations can come in different forms. I've just found my job is to really find what it is that they're good at and then allow them to do that. If the analyst loves talking strategy, great. Let's lean into that. If they love telling stories, then we can do that. I can give you a runway to do that. I can set you up for that. If they like the comedic side, that's super. We can go there. If it's X's and O's and that's what really drives them, great. But you do have to figure out and evaluate ahead of time, just like anything in life. It's almost a read the room scenario. Read the room. Get a sense of what you're working with here. And it's your job to assess it and then make some decisions in real time as to what would make for the best broadcast.
How is your relationship with Mike Fratello? Did that video going viral again earlier this year kind of turn up old wounds or anything?
Yeah, a lot of old wounds. He's my mortal enemy, Brandon. There's nothing more that needs to be said. That truly is among the funniest things that has ever happened to me in my broadcast career. Like at the end of that video, which was at the end of the season, a Nets Celtics game, the Nets were not very good. You could look up their record that year. Sundiata Gaines was on the floor for the Nets. Nice player from Georgia Tech, but didn't have a long NBA career. And at the end of that little segment, it was the second half of a back-to-back. We had been in Philly the night before. I drove Mike back from Philly to his hotel in Newark. And we actually high-fived at the end of the segment. Like, oh my gosh, that was really funny. And the next day, I went to the movies with my son, with Noah. And in the middle of the movie, my phone starts blowing up and he turns to me. He's like, what's going on? I was like, I'm not sure. And I just have text after text after text. And it's, oh no, what happened here? Man, you were pissed. And Deadspin had put it online that I teed off on Mike. And clearly this was a huge fight between the two. And it really did go viral. I had never experienced anything like that where the narrative had gone in a certain direction, to the point where Yes Network asked me the next game to address it. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I got a text from my sister, who's not a sports fan, and it was a link to a Yahoo article. And it just said, how's everything going for you? Like, meaning, am I okay? So very good lesson to learn that on the local broadcast, sometimes people don't understand the sarcasm that goes into a segment for an audience that is very familiar with whatever bits that Mike and I have been doing.
The Nets fans understood what was going
on. Yeah. And then for it to resurface earlier this year was actually hilarious as well, because then I got a text from Mike saying, did it happen again?
No Howie Deneroff this year on Westwood One broadcasts. How is that?
Yeah, talked to Howie the other day. Howie's doing well. Just a legend in the industry and someone I knew going back to college. He was a year ahead of me at Syracuse, so I've known Howie forever. Howie was one of those rare people that what he looks like today is what he looked like in college. We all know those people, right? That you go to college with. And I don't know about you, Brandon. I looked very young in college. I looked much younger than whatever my age was until a certain age in my life. Howie had a full-grown mustache. And I remember at a radio meeting, like he's leading the meeting. I'm going, oh, well, he must be a professor and maybe a granddad. He's like, I'm Howie Deneroff. I'm a sophomore. I'm like, what? He's all good. He had an incredible run. He's still going to do big things in this industry. There's no doubt in my mind. But an absolute pleasure to work with, and a really close friend too.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody ever has a bad thing to say about
No.
Howie, for sure. Anyone that has worked with him has always super high praise. How many years did you work with Dan Fouts?
10 years.
10 years.
10
How
years
was
with a
that?
beard. It
How
was
was that
great.
relationship?
Great. Yeah. One of my best friends. He's such a stupendous person. And as a partner, he was fantastic. We hit it off from the moment we started working together. Literally, uh, the first quarter of the first game we did, Raiders at Tennessee, I thought to myself, this is easy. This is how it's supposed to feel. And he had a friend of his, he and his wife, Jerry, know a lot of country music acts. Jerry has run an event in Oregon for many, many years, a musical event. And she's gotten to know a lot of musical stars from the Nashville area. So every time we were in Nashville, they would ask me, hey, is it okay if Vince Gill comes to the booth, or Amy Grant comes to the booth, or Kim Carnes comes to the booth? And John Hyatt was the musician that came that day. So it's our first game, and they hooked him up with a headset. He's standing right behind us. He didn't show up until the game just started. And we get to halftime, and we take our headsets off, and we're starting to walk towards the back of the booth. And Dan introduces me to him, and I shake his hand, and he says, so how many years you guys been working together now? And Dan said, no, that was it. That was the first half that we've ever done together. And the guy said, what? How is that possible? And I knew that that we had something pretty special.
You and Charles Davis are a great team
Thank you.
as well. But in 2020, when CBS tells you Fouts is out and Charles Davis is your new broadcast partner, what's your reaction at that point?
My reaction was sadness initially because of Dan and because of our partnership and our friendship. And, I knew Dan wanted to do more games. I don't think he was done at that point. But what I've recognized in this industry is decisions are made that are above your head, and you have to understand them, and you have to respect those that make those decisions for the reasons that they may have. So I end up talking to Charles when they're about to announce that he's going to get the job. We spoke for about 2 hours the first time. I had met Charles briefly prior. I'm talking about 20 seconds here, 20 seconds there. Once in Atlanta when I was doing a radio game, and I think it was a playoff game, and he happened to be there. He might have been doing the game, or he was just there. And then many years ago, Charles was a sideline reporter on March Madness coverage for CBS way back when. I'd say early aughts. And I think I met him at a seminar, but that was it. So we end up talking for 2 hours and have a great conversation. The world had been shut down at that point in 2020. So me, Charles, and Evan Washburn end up doing about 8 Zooms together weekly, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, not about football, really, just catching up, getting to know one another. So in a strange way, those sessions got us to a point farther ahead than we would have been under normal circumstances, where maybe we would have met up once for a lunch or a dinner.
Yeah.
But then the downside of that was we were not allowed to interact once we were on site. We were getting tested every week on site. You had to pass the test in order to do the game, a COVID test. And then we would take separate cars to the stadium. At the stadium, we would have a glass partition or a plastic partition between us. So it was very bizarre in us trying to get to know one another that first year. I'm really proud of the work that we did that first year. You would not have known that that was the case. And now we're in year 5, and it's very smooth sailing. We understand each other, our group, with Evan Washburn, with Ken Mack, our producer, Suzanne Smith, our director, the rest of our crew. it's close knit. We're there for one another. It's very collaborative, and it's just one of those high level work environments where everybody is putting out their best. And I think everybody feels responsible for the success that we're having, which is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And even it was, I'm sure, challenging just because it was different doing those broadcasts during
Yeah.
COVID, during 2020, and even from the standpoint of not having crowds at a lot of those games too, like no fans
Bizarre.
there as well. So then
Yeah, it was
just
bizarre.
to add in the
Brandon,
fact that here you are trying to build chemistry with a new broadcast partner in that time.
Just to give you a little behind the scenes, I tend to ask for just a little bit of crowd noise when I'm doing the game. I want to hear a little bit of the quarterback and what he's saying before the snap. So I'll lay out a little bit. If Rodgers is talking a lot, you might hear on one of our broadcasts, I won't say anything until the snap of the ball, or I'll pick and choose my moment to tell you what down it is. But with that, you don't, at least for me, you don't want to get overwhelmed by the crowd noise where you get swallowed up in it in your own headset. That's why I just asked for a little bit. That year in 2020, I told the audio guy it was all fake crowd noise. It was a combination of NFL Films crowd noise that they would get each week. They would roll on each stadium just to have a base of sound that they could use on their variety of shows. And Madden, they were using audio crowd noise from Madden. So it was this combination. And I told our audio guy week one, I said, just give me whatever you got. I need to simulate as if there's crowd here, because the inequity in level on a play that was a big deal, and maybe you're not getting to that place with your voice quality because you're not feeling the ambiance, you're not feeling the crowd. I just told him, whatever you got, give it to me. And that year, that entire season, they were pumping crowd noise into my headset just to make me feel as if I had to meet a moment. So the Kyler Murray Hail Mary against Buffalo, I think there were 7,500 people in the stadium. It was like a friends and family deal. And this is one of the great endings that I've called in my career. And you're trying to get there with your volume level, with your intensity level, and you look around, the surreal nature of what you're dealing with is there's nobody there.
Yeah.
So it was very odd. And the last part of it, the crowd noise was on a loop. So there were times where I could literally hear when it was starting over. I heard week one, I had Baltimore, Cleveland that year with Charles. And I heard, I don't know, 6 minutes into the game, I hear someone yell, "Come on!" I look around like, who was that? And truly, I'm looking at there's no one in the stands. I was like, was it a security guard or what's happening? And then like 12 minutes later, I hear, "Come on!" It's the same guy. And I realized every 12 minutes we were getting the "come on" guy from Madden. It was very strange.
Is there competition between NFL booths? Like do you and Charles worry about trying to be better than Jim Nantz and Tony Romo? And or me, I'll even ask this: Does networks ranking their booths, does that create competition?
I mean, I think it creates competition because you want to be the best version of who you are. I don't know if you're basing it off someone else. That's at least not been my perspective all these years doing this. I just want to do the best that we can do. And then the public and your bosses determine where everybody slots in. I've been all over that listing. My first year was 1998, and you could look year in, year out. They would vary based on your partner, based on other hirings. Greg Gumbel went from games to studio, back to games. Dick Enberg, the late great Dick Enberg, came over from NBC. That affected where everybody was in the order. So I think for me, what I realized at some point, I don't know what year that was, but it did happen. I can only control what I can control. And I have to go do quality work. And it doesn't matter if it's a CBS broadcast, if it's a TNT broadcast, if it's a Yes broadcast, if it's a Westwood broadcast, if it's a Tennis Channel broadcast, whatever. I have to bring my best every game. It matters to somebody. So somewhere along the way, I figured out that philosophy that all the games are important. My reputation, when I say who I am at the top of the broadcast, means something. It means something to me. And that's how I view it. So I can't tell you that there's direct competition with any other booth. I just know that Charles, myself, Evan, our crew, we're not going to change what we do based on what percentage of the country we're going to, or what game we're going against, or what the records are of the two teams that we're working. It's going to be the same philosophy, the same approach, and the same standard in which we hold ourselves every week.
Would you like to call a Super Bowl? I know you mentioned doing the world feed earlier, but like
Yep.
calling a Super Bowl for a network in the US. Is
Yeah,
that
I
a
think
goal?
I think you know the answer. I would tell you yes, of course. It's a goal for anyone that does the NFL, is to do the final game. And that would be true of anyone that does the NHL or the NBA or Major League Baseball or MLS or Bundesliga, whatever. Your goal is to call the biggest events. But so many things have to happen for that to happen. So if you get caught up in the politics of it, or how that will one day become a reality, that's going to derail you from what the main objective is, and that is to do high quality broadcasts every time you're out there.
Yeah. We had Ryan Root go on at one point, and he was talking about doing the WNBA, and earlier in his tenure with the WNBA, kind of viewing it as a stepping stone, and then starting to value getting to call the WNBA finals
Yeah.
and just the importance of calling the last game in the WNBA and how valuable that is. How is now getting to do that for college basketball for yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. I certainly didn't go into it saying this is going to change my career, change the way that I'm perceived. I was the same person before the Final Four, same person after the Final Four. What I did notice that maybe others changed around me. And that's the part that you're never quite sure how that's going to go. All of it was positive. I truly had a blast doing it, reminded myself several times, the weeks leading up to it, the days leading up to it, the hours leading up to it, and then the minutes leading up to it. Enjoy it. Have fun. Don't look back on this and say I was too pent up with angst or stress. Go the other way. Call a game. That's what you've been doing. Call the game. Don't do it differently. Don't view it differently. Of course, you recognize what the stakes are, what the stage is. I'm human. I'm well aware, but I really made a concerted effort not to vary up my routine and how I would go about my business when I call any game. And I think that was a really valuable lesson that you have to experience yourself. Somebody could tell you that. You have to go do it. And ultimately, I feel really good about that part of it. And I also recognize how much it means, how much it meant to UConn fans and Purdue fans and Alabama fans and NC State fans to get to the Final Four, and that the soundtrack of those moments will have my voice on it. So you better do a damn good job, because this is the pinnacle and the epitome for so many of the participants, coaches, family members, staff members, alumni. So as long as you recognize the responsibility of it and you don't poo-poo that, I tried to balance that out in my head. Do good work. Don't make drastic changes to what you've been doing, but also recognize that this matters to a lot of people.
Were you always comfortable in front of a large audience?
I was. Yeah, that was from my childhood. I was placed in situations that put me in the spotlight on a bunch of different things and always liked it. Always enjoyed it. Always got a rush of some feeling that I could see doing something along these lines. And my parents were in entertainment, so I saw it firsthand. I saw my father on stage, my mother on stage, and not just once, hundreds of times. And that repetition of seeing how comfortable they were and the confidence that they had when they weren't on stage, and then how they transferred it over, no problem. And then just seeing them in everyday life, how they carried themselves, how they treated others, how they viewed life. It was a really strong foundation for me to one day do this and not feel overwhelmed or not feel like this wasn't possible or attainable. All of it felt very much attainable, even if I was naive to think that it was. But it all felt like something I could do at a young age. I was told I could do it, so I believed it. And oftentimes that's half the battle.
How was getting to watch Noah during the Olympics in those big moments? Are you nervous when you're watching him call a game in the spotlight, or are you able to sit back and enjoy it?
I'm much more nervous watching him than I am doing it myself. So I think anyone that's a parent can attest to this. You would trade places at any point of any moment if it would make your kid's life easier. That's just a perspective. And it would be no different than when Noah was in Little League or playing basketball or swimming or tennis. You feel the angst of him having to go out and perform, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't help him. So I would equate it to that. I would say it's a little different in that I just have so much institutional knowledge of how this stuff works. And because of that, I know all of the elements of what makes for a good broadcast or what can sidetrack a broadcast in the moment. And being that aware is often not necessarily your friend, but he does not feel those levels of stress that I described. He's really comfortable doing this. It comes across that way. He is a student of this. He cares about it. He wants to do it the right way. This is not someone that's looking to cut corners. So I know the work that he puts in. I know the preparation. And then I also know the kind of person he is and how he treats others and how he finds common ground with his analysts and producers and on and on and on. And that gives you confidence as a parent when you see your kid in those situations, knowing that they are ready for it.
And that comfort level is probably one of the hardest things for some aspiring sportscasters to develop. And I think so. It's interesting that you mentioned watching your parents at a young age and the repetition and seeing them on stage. Obviously, Noah was able to watch you up close
Yeah.
throughout your career and as he was growing up. And then there are the nepotism claims that that Joe Buck has dealt with and Kenny Albert and Noah has now received, but that growing up in it and watching it firsthand versus just kind of getting thrown into it in college, It's impossible to duplicate or impossible to devalue.
I think it does go a long way. Obviously, if you're around it, there's a form of osmosis that seeps in. You've seen it, you know what it's about, you've witnessed it, you've seen behind the scenes, you've seen literally the camera and your father, or the microphone or headset and your father. And there is an eternal benefit from that. And then, look, there is something to be said for ability, natural ability that's in you, that's been passed down, that makes you comfortable in those situations. It doesn't mean that every kid of every broadcaster is destined to do this, and a lot of them aren't interested in doing this. And I think that's a big part of it too, at least from my perspective and for my wife. We really never told him, hey, this is something you should consider. It was always his choice, his decision to figure out what would provide happiness, because that's what we root for. I hate to break it down to the simplest form, but that's really what it is.
Yeah.
You want your kid to be happy
Yeah.
in life. Try to figure out what makes you happy and then follow that path. And I know it's much more intricate in that than that in life. I get that. But sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And for Joe and for Kenny and for others, Noah included, they all determined that that would make me happy. I'm gonna try that and see where it takes me.
Yeah. It seemed like it was near unanimous on social media how good Noah did during the Olympics. Everybody seemed to love it. And while I understand social media is just a small percentage of the
Yep.
audience, but that's usually the loudest, filled with the loudest critics. So to like see the amount of people that were saying how good Noah and Dwayne Wade were doing,
Yep.
I think that certainly says something for the job that they did.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add, Brandon, look, all of that is a part of it, and there's no avoiding it, certainly in this day and age. When I broke in at WFAN radio, this is the early 90s, and the only feedback you were getting was from the callers, and then an occasional letter that you would get in the mail. Or then Mike and the Mad Dog came up with Fax Fridays, where people would fax in questions and they would literally read them on the air. That was it. That was it. Or media critics at the time, Phil Mushnick, who was still writing for the New York Post, Bob Raceman,
Yeah.
writes for the Daily News. There were a few other writers in the New York area, Stan Isaacs in Newsday at the time, and eventually Richard Sandomir with the New York Times, Rudy Martzke at USA Today. That was your feedback. And what it taught me at that point, that I still subscribe to today, is self-criticism is still going to be number one. That's the top aspect of this. You've got to develop a real understanding of when you've done something well, or if you haven't met the mark, if it's subpar, and correct it. And that comes from watching your stuff and policing yourself in many ways, of not making the same mistakes over and over. And even amidst social media, which, yes, it's huge. When that developed, it became a whole other avenue in which to get an opinion. Your toughest critic is you. Always. It always has to be you. And that's a non-negotiable.
When you got to WFAN, was the goal the whole time to be play-by-play? Did you ever think about being a sports radio host?
No, my whole track was sports radio. I got into play-by-play really by accident, because a job opened up with the Nets in 1994. I read about it in Phil Mushnick's column that Howard David was moving on from New Jersey Nets broadcasts. He eventually got a job in Milwaukee, and this job was opening up, and a series of events led me to an interview with John Spoelstra, the president of the team, dad of Eric Spoelstra. And I ended up getting the job, and that took me on a completely different course. I was interested in play-by-play. I did it in college. It was something that I viewed as a career goal, but I didn't really have an idea of how that would come about. I was on the brink of probably breaking through at WFAN with some kind of full-time talk show work. I had done weekend overnights in 1992. So that's Friday night at midnight until 6 a.m. Saturday morning, Saturday night at midnight until 6 a.m. Sunday morning, every weekend for a year. 1992, I was working with Mike and the Mad Dog Monday through Friday, and then hosting this show on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. I moved off the Mike and the Mad Dog show. I was made full-time on air starting in 1993, but without a real shift. Fill-in guy, uh, updates, talk, whatever they needed of me. Go out, cover an event. And I went on my honeymoon, June of 1993, and called home, checked in with my dad. My dad said, "Oh, I don't know if you heard, but Steve Levy is leaving WFAN." I said, "No, I didn't know. We were in Italy." And I got back from that honeymoon. They made me full-time on air at FAN, so a staff announcer. And when Mike Lupica and Len Berman came on board to host shows at WFAN, I was actually offered to Mike as a co-host of his show. And he said, "No, no, 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 I don't need a co-host." About a month in, both Len and Mike, they were on back to back. If I was doing updates, they would ask me to sit in with them. So, hey, instead of going back in the newsroom and type up your updates, you mind just sitting in here if I want to bounce some things off? I went, yeah, no problem. No problem. And Mike Lupica came up to me, I remember this vividly, in the hallway and said, "I screwed up. I should have said yes to you as my co-host. That's on me, but we'll just keep going whenever you're on doing updates. We'll just do it this way." I went, "Yeah, no problem. You got it." And then the next job came about soon thereafter, and that was the end of that.
Oh, so you were very close to getting a
Yes.
midday job there. Wow, that's interesting. How was working with Mike and Chris?
It was about as much fun as I had ever had in the industry. And I still look back on it as incredibly instrumental in who I eventually became as a broadcaster, my understanding of chemistry, my understanding of having fun and keeping it light when it requires, my understanding of how to move a topic along and be smart in how you do that. All of that was learned from being behind the glass with Mike and the Mad Dog, and also a friendship, both of them. You know, I became very close with both of them individually. That's the time when they were still actually getting along pretty well. But they were incredibly welcoming to me. I think they recognized that I brought something to the table, so it was mutually beneficial. I wasn't just along for the ride. And it was a challenging year because I was working 7 days a week,
Yeah.
but it was also a very fruitful year in that I learned so much. I always looked at FAN as almost like graduate school for me. I was getting paid, not a lot, but I was getting paid. And every day I was learning an incredible amount about sports radio, about media, about relationships, about this place that we all knew it was special. I don't know if we recognized that it was going to become the blueprint of what sports radio eventually became. So I interned there in 1989. It's 2 years old at that point. I got a job there in 1990. I'm behind the scenes. I'm working with Howie Rose, 7 to midnight, from May of 1990 until January of 92. I get my first on-air opportunity, September of 91. Update anchor was out sick. I got a chance to do updates. Steve Levy and I co-hosted a Super Bowl pregame show, 5-hour pregame show. leading into Buffalo, Washington in 1992. And then Jody McDonald left for Philadelphia. He was doing weekend overnights to take a shift at WIP. I take over weekend overnights. I'm doing both the behind the scenes work and the on air work. And I walked out of there with so much knowledge about this industry and this business. And also back then, it really was like a sitcom. Being there was more or less what I envisioned a sitcom about radio could be. That's what it was. It was fun every day of the week.
And then pretty cool that you were doing updates in the afternoons, Mike Breen doing updates for
Yep.
IMIS, and then you see where both of your careers, and then obviously Steve Levy as well, especially when he was doing Monday Night Football, like just the careers of the three of you from WFA and updates to that is pretty cool.
Yeah, Bob was choosing as well. You know, Bob,
yeah, right.
He was basically just behind me on that shift where he broke in, started doing updates, started doing shows, started doing play-by-play as really talented play-by-play guy on hockey, football, basketball, beyond. And he was another one that came right through that system. I thought the station was pumping out so much talent at that time. And I know you had a brush with the station as well, did you not?
Yeah, I did. I did the Fantasy Phenom one year.
I remember it.
And
remember it well.
It was the last year that they did it, 2015. And
how old were you at the time?
I was 26.
Yep.
26 at the time.
Well, can I ask you, when did you start looking into a camera and giving sports takes? How old were you when you were doing that for the first time?
Looking into a camera and giving sports
Looking
takes?
into a camera and just giving your thoughts on sports.
That was it. That was the first time.
So you were a product of WFAN is the point. Is if
yes.
You grew up in this general area, your whole knowledge base was coming from this all sports radio station that had opinions throughout the day, personalities, updates, the impact it had on me as a young person, because the station had just started. I was 18 when the station came on the air. And I can imagine in your position, same deal. I just thought the idea that you could do this and make a living talking sports for a living just seemed like the ultimate goal in life. And a lot of it, I think, is based on sports radio and the era in which you grew up.
Yeah, no, for sure. That was, I mean, I was absolutely the kid in the car asking my parents to put Mike and the Mad Dog on during the weekend, on the weekends as well, listening to Chris Saturday mornings and Mike Sunday mornings. If we were in the car, I was demanding WFAN got put on. So for sure, product.
And they did it. They actually listened to you and changed the channel for you.
Absolutely.
Nice parents.
Yeah, they did it. Last thing, the NBA on TNT.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that breaking up?
Yeah, incredibly bittersweet. I think there are so many people connected to it that have been associated with the league for so long, that have done incredible work to make the league what it is in many ways, because similar to what we were talking about in regards to WFAN radio, you have a generation of NBA fans that have watched and consumed the NBA on TNT, from studio to games to peripheral programming, and not just doing it, but doing it in an exemplary way, a gold standard of which to do the job. So yeah, it's going to be a really unique year, because if it is indeed the end, it's a celebration in many ways, but you still got to go out and do your job and call the games and host the studio and go about your business. But I think it's going to be pretty emotional when it's all said and done. Just an incredible group of people that all came together for all the right reasons to do this job the right way.
And then what happens to you from calling NBA games on a national standpoint? Obviously you have the Nets locally, but what about on the national stage?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I'm not sure. I think there are some possibilities out there, but there's nothing set in stone. So my hope is that it continues. I love doing the NBA. I've been doing it since 1994, have a real passion for it, enjoy all aspects of it, and certainly appreciate the national side of it, jumping in on a great matchup in a fantastic venue with an incredible ambiance and environment. You get goosebumps in those moments. There were a number of times in the playoffs last year where, I had to pull the old, you got to pinch yourself that you're doing these games. And I felt that way, of course, during the Final Four as well. It's interesting because the Final Four is in such a cavernous venue that you don't have the same feeling, the same physical feeling that you do when you're calling the NBA and there's 19,000 fans on top of you. College basketball regular season, you go to Kansas, you go to Tennessee, you go to Duke, of course, you feel it. Final Four, the fans are away from you. Everybody is far away. So I remember going up for our open for the Final Four. You have to go up the stairs. It's an elevated floor. And you feel like you're so far away from mankind. It's really strange. The camera that's shooting you, normally, if they're shooting with you on the court, NBA arena, college basketball arena, the fans are right there. You look off to the side, it's fans. It's laced with fans. And in the Final Four, it was not. And that's an adjustment. It was definitely a little different, where I had to catch myself and recognize, okay, energy level is paramount in these situations, and understanding that you're not going to get the same stimuli that you would normally get in your normal day-to-day broadcast setup. So my hope is things work out, and we'll see. Hopefully there's a little more clarity coming up.
Have you thought about which, I mean, Amazon, NBC, ESPN, have you thought about which would be a potentially better fit for yourself?
Well, you can have ideas yourself of where you think, but they have to have the same ideas. So it's not as simple, at least in my perspective, from that point of view. I hope there's a spot, and I hope to continue doing this, and certainly feel like I'm doing my best work at this point in my career, and I'd like to continue it. I also like to believe that I still haven't called the best moment of my broadcast career, that there's something out there in the future that one day I'll look back on and say, wow, that blew my mind. And that's how you have to view it. I think every game poses a possibility of something that you did not expect. And that's what keeps us coming back. The mystery, the fact that you can't predict this. It is truly the best reality show in the world. Sports is true reality. You could tape it, you could watch it back later, but there's a pretty good chance you're going to know the result or hear about it or see it, a glimpse on your phone. You have to be there. You have to be on it to experience it. And as a play-by-play announcer, that's what keeps you excited to call something new and different and unique. And even this Super Bowl this last year was on the world feed. I can't tell you the feelings that I was experiencing as that was building and building and building into the overtime period. And now every play could be the game ender. And as a play-by-play announcer, it's your job to meet the moment. You can't let the moment pass you by. So that's what you root for, and that's what you keep coming back for.
Ian, you were great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
Episode number 68 in the books.
68. That's you. Yep.
That's it.
That is Ian Eagle. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.